What is up, everybody? It's your boy. I'm so tired and I don't want to do this. We are starting off with the second video because it's the longer one. So, yay. Also, I will be skipping all the times he's just shouting people out. I also don't know if you can see me. I know you can see my arm. That might be important. Okay, you can see the screen. It's Heimler. You can see the paper. Don't know if you can see my face, and if you can, then that sucks. It's so sad.
All right, welcome in, my lovelies. So good to see you guys again. And just in case you were here last night and you heard my introduction, you heard me say, yeah, we're going to do this tomorrow night, and then you're going to have the exam on Monday. You don't have your exam on Monday. I think you know that. I just wanted to make sure that you weren't thinking that I knew something you didn't know and that it was actually on Monday. It is not on Monday. It is on Tuesday. So that's just wanted to clear that up. Anyway, so glad to have you here. We're going to go through government units 3, 4, and 5 tonight, which will round out the rest of the course. Go through some of the top level things that you need to know. And by the way, if you want to follow along, I've got some notes that you can follow along with that are linked down in the description. There's also a pinned comment there, so if anybody asks about it, make sure that somebody sees it, point them down below, so that they can get it as well. This will be about 90 minutes-ish. The content portion of it will be about 90 minutes. And if you want to do the super chats to do a shout out, then that's great. I will do those. I'll do a few of them between the units, but I'll do most of them at the end. So if you submit a super chat, make sure you have a good, just have a sense of when you sent it, like write it down, something like that, because as I'm reading them, I'll make sure to tell you like what time I'm reading from and when they were submitted. It would be great if I could just be like, you know, as soon as they come in, I just say them or whatever, but alas, you guys need to study and I need to help you out with that. So I will say on the topic of super chats, and we'll get right into it here in just a second, 3 of them did come through last night before the time, and I did not read them. My mistake. So I just want to go ahead and get that out of the way now so that I don't forget. And get those over here. First one's from Dark Gladiator. Go Rachel Carr from Wiley East. Tung Tung Tough. If that's the same Rachel Carr I know, then that's fantastic. Wow. Love it. And then from Chris Kemjor. Hey Heimler, you're the reason I got a 5 last year, and I'm gonna name my firstborn child after you. Hope you don't have my complaints. Hey, no complaints on that. You got to go with what your heart tells you. And then finally, Clary Kim. Shout out to Mr. Jason Gapa. There it is. Okay, so those are the 3 that I missed last night. So sorry. I hope you guys are here to hear those. And if anybody knows them and they're not here, you know, let them know. So I think we ought to just get started, but I don't know. We also have a tradition around here, and that tradition is that I begin things with a small bit of levity. And tonight I want to tell you about the time I went recently to go buy some bees from a local beekeeper down the road. And I go up to him and I say, hey, I need a dozen bees. He puts them in a container, he hands them to me, and I look and I say, wait, there's 13 bees in here. There's 13 bees. There's 13 bees in here, not 12. And the beekeeper says, oh, that's a freebie. I couldn't even get through it. It's a good one. It's a good one. Yes, indeed. Yes, I did use that in last year's A-Push. But as I was searching my heart tonight for the right joke, that one just kept presenting itself. Still funny a year later, still funny. And if y'all were here last night, and I was having some real struggles with my voice after a while. Got some tea, got a lozenge, got all sorts of things to help it not be that way anymore. But if whatever's going on in my throat starts happening and I cough and I'm just not going to name it. It's there. Sorry. Love you guys. This is how it goes. Show must go on. So, all that to say, I say we go ahead and get this party started. So, let's begin with Unit 3. Unit 3, Civil Liberties and Civil Rights. Okay, first big idea. The Bill of Rights protects individual liberties. Okay, now, U.S. Constitution includes a Bill of Rights, and that's the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. They are specifically designed to protect individual liberties and rights, and even more to the point, those are enacted in order to protect individuals in their civil liberties from intrusion from the federal government. Okay, now, when the Bill of Rights was first written, first ratified, the protection of these liberties did not include protection from state governments. That didn't come till after the Civil War, and it's a whole thing that we'll get into. But over time, the Supreme Court has interpreted and reinterpreted the meaning of these liberties in order to expand or contract personal liberties. And we could go into 1,000 different examples of that, but you have to realize when we're talking about the Bill of Rights and how Supreme Court cases relate to them, they're either contracting civil liberties or they're expanding civil liberties, and the court's interpretation always falls along a very particular scale. That scale on one side is public interest and public safety, and on the other side it's personal freedom. And maybe one thing more than any that I want you to get into your brain folds and stick them there and never forget them is that the liberties that are contained within that Bill of Rights, these liberties are not absolute. Okay, and I'm going to expand on that as we go tonight, but those liberties are not absolute. Just because it protects freedom of speech doesn't mean you can say anything you want at any time, at any place. It's not what it means. Okay, that's what I want you to remember. And that leads us to big idea number 2. The Supreme Court has engaged in an ongoing debate over the First Amendment's protection of the freedom of religion, centered on balancing majoritarian religious practices and free exercise. Okay, so when it comes to the freedom of religion, we'll start there. There are 2 clauses in the First Amendment that you really need to know. Number 1, the Establishment Clause. Number 2, the Free Exercise Clause. So the Establishment Clause protects the civil liberty of, it prevents the federal government from either endorsing or creating a state religion, a state church, that sort of thing. The Free Exercise Clause says that the federal government cannot infringe on the legitimate free exercise of someone's religious practices. Now, those 2 clauses have been the subject of ongoing debate, and the attempt is always to try to balance the majoritarian religious practices with free exercise. Okay, and 2 very important cases, required cases that you need to know, put that tension on display. First is Engel v. Vitale. Now, that was in 1962. The complaint in that, I'm not going to go through these cases in too much detail, but the basic complaint in that case was that mandatory public school prayer, they argued, violated the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. Ultimately, the decision was that, yeah, mandatory public prayer in school did violate the Establishment Clause, but also because of the 14th Amendment, the state of New York was forbidden to endorse religion as well. That's something that we're going to get into a lot. If there's one theme that sort of like dominates tonight, it is the 14th Amendment. If you're gonna forget every amendment in this course and only remember one, you're probably going to do best to remember the 14th Amendment. I'm not saying that's the only one that's going to be on the exam, but it does show up a whole lot, especially in this unit, because it's very, very important. Now, that was the Engel case. The second case that puts that, majoritarian religious exercise versus majoritarian religious practices versus free exercise tension on display is Wisconsin v. Yoder. I saw some of you guys mentioning that, hoping to the good Lord that is going to show up on your FRQs. And for your sake, I hope that it does. And I don't have any inside information. I don't know anything about this, but I love you guys. So I hope it does, if that's what you're feeling good about. Anyway, back to the program. Wisconsin v. Yoder. So the complaint here was that compulsory schooling after 8th grade violated the free exercise, the protection of the free exercise of religion among Amish communities who wanted their kids to stay home after 8th grade. Ultimately, the decision was that the court ruled that it did violate the free exercise clause because requiring these children to continue in school would expose them to values that ran counter to their community's religious beliefs. And so, and remember, I talked about the tension. Balancing free exercise, public safety, public interest with individual liberty. These two cases are a clear example of the court ruling in favor of individual liberty. Okay? That leads us on to big idea number 3. The First Amendment's protection of freedom of speech is not absolute, as I already said, but in order to restrict speech, the government has a high bar to reach. So yeah, can the government restrict speech? Yes, it can. Is it easy for the government to restrict speech? No, it is not. So the key case for symbolic speech, the protection of symbolic speech, was Tinker v. Des Moines. That's 1969. In that case, school administrators suspended students for wearing black armbands in protest of the Vietnam War, and they were like, hey, this is gonna, disrupt class. Vietnam War was very contentious. Ultimately, the court decided that the administration had violated, they did violate the First Amendment right to symbolic speech for these students. And, the administration, they were fearing the disruption that would cause, but the court argued, yeah, there wasn't any actual disruption. It was just you were afraid of that disruption. So, ultimately the ruling said, no, the administration, really their only motivation was to silence these students' protests. So now, ultimately, as the court has considered First Amendment speech cases, they're working to maintain that balance between social order and individual freedom. As I said before, that's very important to remember. And so when it comes to free speech, over time, the court has decided that speech can be restricted, but as I said, there's a high bar to reach, and speech can only be restricted on the following conditions. Number 1, time, place, and manner regulations. Okay, so the ruling was that the government can restrict the freedom of speech, but they can't restrict the content of that speech. The words that are flapping out of your mouth hole. They can only silence or regulate the time in which you flap your mouth hole, the place in which you flap your mouth hole, and the manner in which you flap your mouth hole. Okay. So the time, place, and manner. That's one bar that they have to reach. The second legitimate way that the government can restrict speech is if it's defamatory speech, if it's offensive, if it's obscene, even if it's symbolic, obscene statements, obscene gestures. The First Amendment does not protect these. This is in the interest of public safety and public interest, right? And then finally, third, the government can restrict speech if that speech presents a clear and present danger, okay? This came out of a ruling in 1919 called Schenck v. the United States. And long story short, a guy was distributing literature telling American men to avoid the draft for World War I. And so the court ruled that, yeah, you can't actually do that because there's a very pronounced public safety issue with you trying to get people to not enlist. So those are the 3 conditions for restricting speech. And if it's going to happen, it's very hard to clear that bar, which is why it almost never happens. And that's a good thing. And that leads us, ladies and gentlemen, to big idea number 3. No, 4. Okay, the First Amendment's protection of the freedom of the press is essential to the working of a democracy. If you are going to have a democracy, you have to have a free press. That's just how it works. The politicians are out there doing their thing. We elected them. Remember last night, popular sovereignty, social contract. In the American form of government, the people are the ones who have the power, and we sort of lend that power to our politicians to make policy on our behalf. And the only way we're going to know what they're doing over there in Washington, D.C. and in the state governments and all that is if we have newspapers and reporters who are giving us that information so that we can then hold those politicians accountable, or say, hey, you're doing a great job. So generally speaking, the same standards are applied when it comes to the First Amendment protection of the press. Same standards are applied to the press that are applied to speech. It's very difficult to silence the news from a legal standpoint, and that's a big reason for that is because the court bolstered the freedom of the press through a case called New York Times v. the United States in 1971. Long story short, President Nixon wanted to shut down the publication of some leaked classified documents about the Vietnam War. That frankly made him look really bad, and the New York Times wanted to publish this, and he wanted to shut it down in the name of national security. Well, ultimately, the court ruled in favor of the New York Times, saying that cries for national security, excuse me, don't justify prior restraint. Okay, and prior restraint is the term for when the government has the right to restrict the content of printed material before it is printed, and that the justification is almost always national security. You can't print this because it's going to cause some real national security problems. But again, with this court case, that option for invoking prior restraint is very high, very difficult to reach. And that leads us to big idea number 5. We're cooking tonight, guys. We're cooking. Yes, the Pentagon Papers. Yes, that's what they are, indeed. No, I don't have any FRQ predictions. That my mind doesn't work that way. I wish it did.
That's Mr. Clifford.
Okay, let's go back to big idea number 5. The Supreme Court's interpretation of the Second Amendment has almost always upheld an individual's right to own a gun. Oh, good. Something that's not controversial at all. But we're just dealing with the facts here. So a very significant case in Second Amendment case history was the District of Columbia v. Heller in 2008. This is not a one of your required Supreme Court cases, but it is very, very helpful to know. And it is in the curriculum as well. So in this case, a security guard in Washington, D.C., he wanted to carry his revolver home with him for personal safety, and the gun laws that were in D.C. at the time basically made owning a gun for self-defense about impossible. So, there was like trigger lock regulations. The point is, if somebody broke into your home, there'd be like, you need to say, hey, just hold on for like 10 minutes while I unlock this and do this. It wouldn't work. So in this case, the court ruled actually in Heller's favor and established for the first time an official interpretation of the Second Amendment that upheld an individual's right to own a gun. Now, we're going to go further on the Second Amendment later, but now let's go to big idea number 6. So, again, none of the rights in the Bill of Rights are absolute. 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 Each right is always a balancing act between individual liberty and public order and safety. Okay? It's kind of reiterating what we've said before, but man, these are important. So here, we're just going to have sort of a junk drawer of how the several other amendments have been interpreted in light of this balancing between individual liberty and public order. So let's go with the 8th Amendment first, okay? The 8th Amendment prevents cruel and unusual punishment and excessive bail. And so that has led to debates among the states about the death penalty and torture. And when it comes to the death penalty, the 5th Amendment says, we're in the heading of the 8th Amendment here, but let's just take a little detour over into the 5th Amendment. The 5th Amendment says that a person can be deprived of life just as long as it's done within the confines of the due process of law. But through various Supreme Court cases, states have either restricted or expanded the application of the death penalty. And I'm not going to get into those cases now. You just need to know that it's been some states allow death penalties, some do not. They interpret it differently. Then we'll move on from the Eighth Amendment and talk about debates that have gone on around the Second and the Fourth Amendments. So, with respect to the Fourth Amendment, which offers protection or enshrines protection against unwarranted searches and seizures, you have privacy in your own papers and affairs, etc. So, one of the big debates modern debates over the Fourth Amendment is, does the collection of metadata interfere with public safety and individual rights? And then on the Second Amendment front, does gun regulation promote or interfere with public safety and individual rights? And so on the Second Amendment side, the gun rights debate is always inflamed by mass shootings. You guys have been alive long enough to know that anytime there's a mass shooting, this debate comes right back up. So like a few years ago, there was a shooting in Las Vegas, killed like 60 people, wounded a little more than 400, I think. And as a result of that, several states banned something called bump stocks. And that basically those are, I don't know anything about guns, so forgive me if I'm saying this wrong, but a bump stock, as I understand it, turns a semi-automatic weapon and basically into a fully automatic weapon. And so as a result of that shooting, that the gun rights debate flared up just as it always does, and there was meaningful legislation put into place as a result in response to that event. Then when it comes to that balance with the Fourth Amendment protects citizens against unreasonable searches and seizures of property. And then more recently, after September 11th, the attacks of September 11th, 2001, President George W. Bush signed into law the Patriot Act. It was a program that allowed the federal government to interfere with third-party cell phone carriers in order to search for leads on suspected terrorists by collecting metadata from cell phones. Now, metadata, in case you don't know, is like all the information about communication with the exception of the content of the communication itself. So when was the call made? How long was it? From whom? To whom? That sort of thing. And where from? Whatever. And in the wake of 9/11, Americans for a while were like, yeah, okay, that's fine. We don't want another terrorist plot. The government's going to uncover it. That's great. But over time, when the extent of this data collection on Americans was leaked by a guy named Edward Snowden, who was a national security agency contractor, American citizens began to wonder if that kind of collection and the scope of it and the extent of it, with the federal government being able to look at their communication and the metadata that indicates who called whom and all that. And there was a new debate over whether that was a violation of Fourth Amendment rights. Okay, so the big one in modern times is the collection of metadata when it comes to the Fourth Amendment. Okay, let's go on to big idea number 7. You guys good?
No.
Why no AP Hero review? It's because the way they put all the exams that I cover on 1 week, and it was I would have to double up on some nights. I think it would be kind of rough. Don't think I could have time, and then nobody would get my best. So I'm sorry. I love you guys. I hope the videos help. Anyway, big idea number 7.
Thank you, Heimler.
Selective incorporation. Oh my gosh. If you phased out, if you zoned out, point your ear holes this way, because selective incorporation is an important one. So selective incorporation applies the protections of the Bill of Rights to the states through the 14th Amendment's due process clause. All of these big ideas are important, but for some reason this one is striking me as particularly important. I don't have any inside information. I don't know. I do know selective incorporation is going to be on your exam. I don't know how or why or in what capacity, but it's a big one. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, originally the Bill of Rights only applied to protection from the federal government, okay? And then 2 things changed this. Number 1, the 14th Amendment was passed, and it has itself a due process clause, which says that no state shall abridge the rights of citizens. So this was a this is a huge change. Like, now the Bill of Rights is protecting citizens not only from the federal government but also from state governments too. It's hard to overstate what an important development that was. So then we get to selective incorporation. Basically, by definition, what this means is selective incorporation is the process of applying certain civil liberties to the states, but not all of them at once. Okay, and this application of the liberties in the Bill of Rights being applied to state governments, that doesn't happen all at once. That's worked out as the Supreme Court considers cases over time. So at this point, the amendments that have been selectively incorporated are the 1st, the 2nd, the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, and the 8th. Okay, they've all been selectively incorporated through various court decisions, but I'll just give you one example, and that is the Second Amendment selective incorporation through a case called McDonald v. Chicago. So go back to the Heller decision we talked about like 5 minutes ago. The Heller decision, even though the court ruled in favor of Heller and interpreted the Second Amendment as a as a protection of an American's right to own a gun, that decision only applied to federal law. Okay, because Washington D.C. it's a weird thing. It's like it's not a state. It's a federal territory, and so it's got its own sort of designation. So the Heller case didn't apply to the state level. And so the argument in McDonald v. Chicago was that states should extend protections of the Second Amendment to states. And so ultimately the court ruled that ruled in favor of that and applied the Second Amendment right to the state. So now in all states, no state can infringe upon an American's right to own a gun. Okay? That leads us to big idea number 8. In trying to balance personal liberty and public order, the court has at times ruled to restrict individual liberty and other times upheld individual liberty. Okay, so we just talked about McDonald v. Chicago. In other cases, the Supreme Court has ruled in favor of individual liberties over states' power. Okay, so it's always a balancing act between those two things, and it changes over time. For example, in Miranda v. Arizona, 1966, this is a case that established the Miranda rule, which upholds the Fifth Amendment's protection against being compelled to be a witness against yourself. And so that means that, anytime someone's arrested, they have to be read their Miranda rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say will be used against you, et cetera, et cetera. That's there to uphold a person's Fifth Amendment rights. So this is an example of what is called procedural due process, which means that when agents of the government, like judges or police officers,
Amber needs her debate paperwork.
Well, there you go.
She asked me to turn it in.
Yeah, but Shrek didn't sign it.
It's
Is that
turned
what she's
in.
here for?
It's turned
You're
in.
turning it in?
Go ask Jolie. I don't know what you want from me, Pop.
Are you doing already the video for Lee?
Yes, go away. Wait, guys, say hi to the YouTube channel. Actually,
Huh?
say hi to the YouTube video.
He said you can stream on Twitch.
It's too late. I'm 26 minutes in.
interact with citizens in ways that could potentially violate their rights, they have to abide by a prescribed and predictable set of rules and procedures. Okay? That is procedural due process.
Okay,
Now,
I got this.
let's move on. That's protecting the Fifth Amendment, that's selective incorporation. Then let's talk about the Sixth Amendment, Gideon v. Wainwright in 1963. By the way, if you
Can't
watch
believe
the
they
video on
overturned
that,
Roe v. Wade.
one of these
This has
videos,
nothing
I'm
to
going
do
to make
with
a
the
new
Sixth
one.
Amendment. Just
If you watch the video on that one, Gideon v. Wainwright, there is an error in that video. I said that the case was decided on the equal protection
believe they removed it from
clause
the
of
AP
the
curriculum,
14th
which
Amendment.
makes sense.
It's not. It's the due process clause. So anyway, if you were confused, I hope you don't get that wrong. Sorry. My bad. Okay, so Gideon v. Wainwright. So guy is convicted in a Florida court, and that court did not provide him a lawyer. Okay? But the Sixth Amendment says that everybody must be provided a lawyer if they don't have one. They can't afford one. But again, that's the Bill of Rights. It only applies to federal law, federal court. So, so state courts were not required to do that. So in Gideon v. Wainwright, the ruling was that the 14th Amendment's due process clause required every state to apply that 6th Amendment provision to provide a lawyer when the defendant cannot afford one. So it's not just federal anymore, it's selectively incorporated to the states with the 6th Amendment. Okay. Now, there's something called the exclusionary rule that you're going to need to know. So, so the 4th Amendment protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. So, you know, government officials cannot break into your house without a warrant, a court-issued warrant, and just search through your stuff and, you know, all that sort of thing. They can't do that. But there's something called the exclusionary rule, which means that evidence that officials gather that is in violation of the 4th Amendment can be excluded from trial. It can't be used as evidence against you. And then, just for poops and giggles, you should know that the 4th Amendment was incorporated to the states in a case called Mapp v. Ohio in 1961. That's a saucy one, but we're going to move on. Now, another big balancing act here is over something that's known as the right to privacy. Now, that's an interesting one because if you've read the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, there is no explicit right to privacy like there is a right to free speech, or, you know, protection against the infringement of free speech, religion, press, etc. There's not the freedom of or the right to privacy is not explicitly stated, but it is implied in several other amendments. And I won't go through all that right now. I'll just tell you how it is implied in the 4th Amendment. And for that, let me deal with Roe v. Wade, a case from 1973. Now, in that time, many states had anti-abortion laws. Texas was among them. A woman wanted to get an abortion, but she could not legally do it under Texas law. And so, at the end of the day, the court ruled that Texas law violated this woman's right to privacy as implicitly stated in the 1st, 4th, 5th, 9th, and 14th Amendments. Okay? It's not as important as you remember all of those amendments, but just to know that the court interpreted a right to privacy within those. And so this was an example of the court ruling according to, we talked about procedural due process before. This is an example of the court ruling according to substantive due process, okay? Now, procedural due process, which I mentioned before, that's about maintaining, you know, proper procedure for carrying out laws to make sure everybody gets the same treatment. Everybody's rights are protected. Substantive due process is about whether the laws themselves are just. And, you know, in the Roe case, the Texas laws against abortion were negated via substantive due process. Now, you should know that the Roe case, the Roe v. Wade case, was overturned in 2022 by another case called Dobbs v. Jackson. And remember, I said last night, it is very difficult. It is very rare for the court to overturn a precedent on account of the principle of stare decisis. And so, you know, it took from 1973 to 2022 for it to actually happen. But in Dobbs v. Jackson, that officially overturned Roe v. Wade, and the court ruled that the Constitution does not protect the right to abortion and then returned the legislative power over abortion to the states. Okay? All right, we got 2 more big ideas here. Let's get through them. Stare decisis is it basically means let the decision stand. It's the way the court approaches their past decisions. Like, if they've decided one way, they're not often gonna overturn that. Okay? We talked about that last night. All right. Big idea number 9. Constitutional provisions have inspired and supported social movements. Okay. I've been talking all about civil liberties. Now let's bring civil rights into the mix. So civil liberties, when we talk about those, we're talking about freedoms that are guaranteed by the Constitution. Okay, that's what's enshrined there in the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. Civil rights, on the other hand, is different. That's the push to make sure that all citizens are equally protected from discrimination based on their race, their national origin, their religion, gender, etc. Okay. Now, the most prominent manifestation of fighting for civil rights in recent history, in the last 100 years or so, was the civil rights movement from the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. So the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment technically made Black Americans equal to white Americans, but in practice it wasn't that way, like on the streets in reality. A key figure in this movement was Martin Luther King Jr. He wrote one of your required documents, which is the letter from a Birmingham jail. And this letter is actually King's response while he was, imprisoned for nonviolently opposing Alabama's racist transportation laws. This letter is a response from King to the white clergy of that city, who urged him to wait patiently while they worked on civil rights on the legislative and the judicial level. They're like, hey, we like what you're doing. We're for it. But, you're out there causing a commotion. You should just settle down. Just be a little quieter. We will work on it while you... And King, the response is magnificent. I'm sure you've read it by now. I hope you've read it. His response is that basically, only those who have not been under the degrading lash of racism can rightly say, wait, just let us handle it. You just keep enduring what you're enduring. He says, no, the time for action is now. And, while racist laws should be fought in court, they must also be protested on the streets. Now, the civil rights movement for the rights of Black Americans actually inspired several other movements for expanded rights for minorities. The next one I want to mention is the women's rights movement. So in 1919, and by the way, all these movements that I'm about to mention, it's not like they just started in, the civil rights movement for Black rights didn't just start in like the 1940s. It had been going on for centuries before that, to 200 years before that. Women's rights didn't just start after the civil rights movement. It's been going on since the beginning of the nation. So I'm just listing them here for simplicity's sake. So women's rights movement, if you'll recall, the 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920. That recognized women's right to vote. The last of all American groups to be recognized as legitimate franchisees was women, and they got that in 1920. But even so, women still were inferior socially, and the law was not applied equally to them as well. For example, the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964, and that outlawed discrimination based on race, yes, but also on sex. But those laws were basically not being enforced. And so many things I can mention about the women's rights movement. I'm only going to drop one here, and that is one of the key victories was the passage of the Title IX of the amendment, of the Education Amendment Acts in 1972. So this guaranteed that women...
Bro, you...
Why are you doing the thing? He told me to come around.
Mr. Lee, I paused.
Have the same opportunities
Now,
as men in educational institutions that received federal funding. Okay, women went on to do much more than that. For time's sake, that's all I can mention. Then there was a renewed movement for LGBTQ plus rights, and a lot of these movements gained steam after seeing the success of the nonviolent movement with the civil rights movement. So this is a movement that addresses the discrimination of the LGBTQ community. One of the big moments here was a court decision on gay marriage. Obergefell v. Hodges in 2015, the court ruled
Hodges?
that the states that prevented same-sex
Hodges?
marriage were violating the 14th Amendment, and so that was a big deal. Now, T's working. Now, the last civil rights movement that I want to, or the last social movement I want to mention is the pro-life movement. So I already mentioned In 1973, Roe v. Wade prevented states from outlawing abortion, and that created a huge backlash, especially among conservative and then especially among
He wants to
conservative
sleep.
religious Americans. So, and so the pro-life movement sprang up, started arguing for the rights of unborn children. That they argued that that what was that what was developing in the womb was not just a collection of cells, but actually a human being that deserved to have their rights protected. Okay, now. The court rulings. Oh, my big idea went away. Too long. There it is. Okay, so what are we talking about? Social movements? Oh yeah, social movements. Okay, so one big thing you have to know about these social movements, a lot of these were very much grassroots movements. They came, the people got together, they began demanding their rights, and you're going to need to know at least a couple of examples of how the government responded to those calls for expanded rights. I'll go real quick. Number one, court rulings. Okay, great example here is Brown v. the Board of Education in 1954. This is a required case, and at the end of the day, it mandated the racial desegregation of public schools.
I can go to school.
But the government also responded by the passage of various policies. I mentioned the Civil Rights Act a little bit ago. There was also a year later the Voting Rights Act in 1965, which made voting discrimination illegal. Now, even with those laws, there was still work to be done, but I just want to acknowledge that, and now we can move on. All right, last big idea of Unit 3. Grassroots movements are when it's like a bottom-up movement. It's the people come together and do it, not like the government does it. Okay, big idea number 10. The Supreme Court has at times allowed the restriction of the civil rights of minority groups and oh, sorry, I'm reading that wrong. The Supreme Court has at times allowed the restriction of civil rights of minority groups and at other times has protected those rights. All right, let's go through this one. Now, big example here, let's get right to the heart of the matter, is affirmative action. So affirmative action is basically, these are policies that are enacted that favor certain groups that have historically been discriminated. Now, an example here is regarding college admissions. In the case the Regents of the University of California v. Bakke in 1978. Now, in that case, a white man, was applying for admission to the University of California, and he was denied admission in favor of minority applicants. Bakke argued that the 14th Amendment was violated because he was denied admission based on his race. And so this became known as, reverse discrimination. And the rule...
I was listening.
It's happening. Sorry, guys. That's the last time I'll say sorry. There it is. Bakke. So the ruling in this case was that mandatory racial quotas are unconstitutional. But it didn't necessarily ban affirmative action. Like, race still could be used as a consideration for admissions. It just got a little murkier there. So that is everything you need to know for Unit 3.
That's all of Unit 3?
Tea in me, and I'm gonna read some super chats here. Hit you. Good to see you guys. Reese Ironi.
We said that we were going to skip the super chats, and you were okay with that. You were okay with that, Mr. Lee.
Yes, and Addison. Hey guys.
I'm
One more
scared.
shout out
I'm
to the
only skipping
Rizless,
1 minute.
Orless Ottoman Empire for a generational fumble against an island nation 2,100 miles away. Indeed. Let us raise our cups. All right. Anthon XYZ. Thank you so much for the reviews, Heimler. This is why you're the GOAT. Oh, thanks. Can we get a second shout out for our class's amazing AP Gov teacher, Mr. Mack, for ensuring that we succeeded and win the game of AP. Mr. Mac, you are well loved. All right, one more, and then we'll get back to the review. This is from Sided Manager, and this is from 7:02 p.m. by the way. Shout out to the Kilowatt Watkins for making every class exciting, and thank you, Heimler, for carrying me in AP World, A-Push, and now in AP Gov. Man, you've been around for a long time. I appreciate that. All right.
Wow.
I say we keep partying. Get on to Unit 4. Unit 4. Will the voice hold? We'll see.
Unit 4. Woo!
Aw. You're beautiful, Heimler. Well, thank you.
Heimler, you
All
are
right.
beautiful.
Big idea number 1. By the way, if you don't have the notes, you can follow along with this. I've got notes down
Pizza
below
Pringles are low-key tough.
that you can download and follow along with. Maybe it'll help. I don't know. Maybe it won't. But they're there for you if you want them. Unit 4, big idea. Americans' relationship to core American beliefs, which are shared by nearly every American, affects how they think about the role of government. Okay, so there are basically 5, this is a massive generalization, but there are basically 5 sort of American values that Americans of all stripes tend to agree on. Number 1 is individualism. Number 2 is equality of opportunity. Number 3, free enterprise.
Okay.
Number 4, the rule of law. And number 5, limited government. So, you know, all Americans basically agree on these fundamentals in principle, but depending on each citizen's political ideology, those 5 ideas are interpreted differently. So when I say political ideology, that comes along a scale, and that scale is basically from liberal to conservative. Okay, and if you're a liberal or somewhere along the scale on that side, you're going to interpret these ideas differently. But if you're a conservative, you're going to interpret these ideas differently as well. Like conservatives and liberals are going to look at individualism and say, yeah, we can all agree on that. That's great. But what they mean by individualism, a whole different thing. For example, a conservative looks at individualism as this is a technical term for it. I'm not like throwing shade. This is just a technical term for it. It's called self-centered individualism, which, you know, emphasizes the interest of individuals above the interests of society. Okay, but liberals look at individualism. They interpreted it. It's almost not fair because the way liberals interpret individualism is called enlightened individualism. Again, not my term.
This was
it is what it is. But basically, that emphasizes the opposite. Basically, emphasizing the interests of the group above the interests of the individual. And then another example, liberals and conservatives are going to look at equality of opportunity and say, yeah, that's something we all value. Very absolutely. But a conservative will look at it and say, you know, when it comes to equality of opportunity, individual sweat is going to lead to success. Like, it doesn't matter who you are. If you work hard enough and you're not lazy, you're going to get everything you want. Okay? Liberals will look at equality, the value of equality of opportunity, and say, look, not everybody starts on the same, you know, equal footing, and you know, some government intervention may be necessary to support those people's advancement because they were not granted the same privileges that these other groups were. Okay? So you need to, those are just 2 examples, so you need to be able to apply that same kind of reasoning to the beliefs of free enterprise, the rule of law, limited government, etc. But for now, we're going to move on to big idea number 2.
Holy crap, you scared the Come in.
Influence political attitudes and social.
You scared the crap out of me.
Different
Elias.
Elias?
influence how people think about politics. Okay? And that's just
Wait, come join my live stream.
Political socialism.
Wait!
Okay? How does a person, you know,
Come take a seat with me.
hold their particular political beliefs? For most people, it's not because they went away into, you know, a library for 5 years and studied everything they could possibly read and came to conclusions and all the research and everything. It's like, and that's fine.
This is being
because
recorded.
Who has time for that? You can't do that.
Yeah, I know.
there's so many other factors that go
Dang,
into
15
how you
minutes. You
hold
already
political
farted?
beliefs.
I
And
came
the
during
most
7th
important of those
period.
factors include family, school, your peers, the media, social environments like religious institutions, for example, and so those things affect how people think politically. And then another factor that affects political socialization is the phenomenon of globalization.
Do you think it porn
So
stuff do that,
this
bro?
is especially, since
You don't remember when,
this has accelerated since after World War II. But globalization is basically
Take some notes, take some
uh,
notes.
Yeah, take the
referring
notes,
to
take the
the
notes.
increasing interconnectedness
Please
of the
continue.
world, and so now we're getting more information from so many different cultures, so many different places, and that's going to affect how we think politically. There's also other things that affect political beliefs are generational and life cycle effects. So generational effects, basically, there are some common themes among the different generations as to how they think politically. So, in the generations you should probably have a good handle on are the silent generation, which are sort of the coming of age in the World War II era, baby boomers, Generation X, millennials, and Generation Z. Okay? Now, within each of those generations, people have, common shared experiences, and all those things influence how they think politically. For example, in Generation X / millennials, like younger X, older millennials, they all, one of the big defining events for them was
Am I in the frame,
the
like my
September
face?
11th attacks.
I know the
So
paper is, and I know the
that-
computer is.
in general,
Well,
again,
the
these are all
computer's kind of
generalizations,
up, so it's
so
mostly-
many exceptions, but in general,
Alright, I'm leaving now. Good luck.
millennials tend to think
Peace out.
favor cooperation.
Later.
Peace out, pa.
For
Hey, that's my boyfriend, Daniel
international
Gutierrez.
policy,
Yeah. No one Sergio's boyfriend.
Shoot, you're right.
Now,
Bye, pa.
with the silent generation, these are today's senior citizens. They grew up in the Great Depression. They grew up in World War II. They have a
That's
high
my bad.
value in religious belief and church participation, and so they were not fans at all of all this cultural upheaval that occurred in the 1960s and 70s with racial integration and women's rights and all the rest. And so that means this generation in general is more conservative. Okay.
In general.
Millennials. Do we already talk about millennials? I can't remember. Okay, let me say something real quick. So millennials, did I talk about X before?
Project X,
Right.
X.
Yeah, I don't know.
You did. Okay. Good
So
job,
millennials, they tend to be more liberal than the previous generations. They're much more favorable to, previous generations like the boomers and the silent generation were much more favorable to the use of force in foreign policy. But millennials tend to value cooperation and diplomacy. So those are the generational effects of political socialization. There are also life cycle effects.
Okay, this is what I
And this is where, like where a person is in their life cycle, like teenager, young adult, middle-aged, senior citizen, whatever, where a person is along that spectrum, that affects how they think about politics and policy. Okay, so for example, this is like you understand this. Like if you're 18, you're watching this, and you can vote, you probably don't have the same concerns as retired Americans and what they are.
They're over here having fun, Mr. Lee.
Vote for and the policies that they want.
Hey, can you guys stop having
That's
fun?
not
I'm getting
something-
phone
Because like voters in college, they tend to prefer candidates who can help them with education issues, like especially student loans, and that's how it should be. Because
Hello.
Alex, we suggested that you do a bedroom stream, right?
Take a nap.
Take a nap, like go to sleep midway through, and then finish it in the morning.
I like that.
Like I
Wait a
should
minute. Wait, bro, hold on! I need 6 more subscribers to live stream.
Too bad.
Get me 6 more subscribers! No! Fun!
Do it on Twitch.
Just post in your Google Classroom, bro. People subscribe. I'll subscribe. I don't know. I'm
Fun!
not your Google Classroom.
I'll do it on Twitch.
Send it to the
Wait,
Divas.
I'll do the second one on Twitch at 10 p. at 11.
Send it to the Divas. I'll subscribe.
Okay.
Do the bedroom stream where you post like.
I'll do a
midway through.
bedroom stream because I have to get home at 11 tonight.
Okay. What?
I have rehearsals.
like voters in college, they tend to prefer candidates who can help them with education issues, like especially student loans and that sort of thing. But senior citizens, they want candidates who are going to uphold their interests, like Social Security, etc. So depending on where you are in your life, that can affect your political socialization. And that's going to lead us to big idea number 3. Actually, hold on just one sec.
Heimler, what are you talking about? Some hold on, wait a sec.
Talk amongst yourselves.
What are you talking about? Some talk amongst yourselves, Heimler. I'm alone. I'm alone. I'm going
All right.
crazy.
Here we go. Big idea. What are we on? 3? All right, go. Big idea number 3. Public opinion is measured through scientific polling, and the results of public opinion polls influence public policies and institutions. Okay, so you're going to need to know 5 types of polls that are used to measure public opinion.
No!
First is an opinion poll.
Watch, this is stuff that I'm already gonna know.
Okay, an opinion poll is just getting a feel for the public's opinion, or their opinion or their feelings about a certain candidate or a certain policy. That's all it is. This is what it sounds like. The second kind you need to know is a benchmark poll. This is a poll that's taken at the beginning of a candidate's run on a certain issue or what people think of the candidate, and then that gives the campaign, like a benchmark, as it's called, against which they can compare future polls to see how they're doing. The third kind of poll you need to know is a tracking poll. These are polls that are conducted over time and usually with the same group of people, and that gives information on how the group feels about a given issue as the campaign progresses. The fourth kind of poll that you need to know is an entrance poll. These are polls that are conducted before people enter their polling location in order to vote, and basically they're just asking, hey, how are you going to vote? And then the pollster marks it down. And then the fifth type is the opposite, and that is exit polls. Those are conducted right after voters leave their polling location, and they ask how did those people vote. Now, public opinion polling, so much we can say about it. But the thing I want to emphasize here is I want to figure out, okay, how do these pollsters ensure that their measurements are legitimate, right? They don't just go out on the street and ask people, they have to have certain techniques, okay? One of those techniques is sampling, okay? They have to have, in order for polling data to be accurate, they need to pull from a representative sample. So a representative sample is basically a small portion of the larger population that has the same characteristics of that larger population, and with that smaller part, they can then, extrapolate
We have a
and
collab.
generalize to the larger population. Also,
Elias, we're collabing. He's doing calc. I'm doing gov. Unstoppable team.
Has to have an equal chance for being selected in order to participate in these polls.
Yeah.
But even if it's a lovely random sample and it's a representative sample, even if they've done all their work, there's always going to be some degree of error in polling numbers. Okay? Like every poll, no matter how rigorously it was composed, it always has a possibility for error in it. And that's because you're not actually asking every single person in the population. You're asking a representative group, and there's always going to be some wiggle room there. That leads us to big idea number 4. There is a discernible relationship between scientific polling and elections and policy debates. All right. So,
I used to be eating with the roaches.
For a minute. Candidates who are running for office.
What was that?
or representatives who are in office.
Soneos.
They decide how.
Oh, you guys are welcome to
run
stay.
Their campaign or how to pass legislation.
Come watch his AP video.
Based on public
I'll do
opinion.
that later. But you want to see the setup for later?
Also,
Yeah.
on the other side, voters decide who they're going to vote for as a result of polling. Okay, So this relationship
I'm not gonna be on my
between,
TV.
you know, polling and elections and policy
This is
making is affected by a couple of things. Number one,
I was looking
I was
for
just saying,
the
'cause
Bro, are
reliability
these even, like-
of public opinion
Bro,
data.
this is
Like
2016.
how,
Alright, let's leave Alex in the sound in the
how
silence
does the
of his
public
voice.
perceive? How good is this data in the public's mind? Like, and recently there's been some significant, like really major polling failures that have, you know, called into question the reliability of polling as an entire exercise. So, you know, for example, the 2016 presidential election, which was a contest between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. This was, you know, the first Trump run, and you know, polls had Hillary Clinton winning by a large margin, and you know, I mean, she did win the popular vote, but it was Trump who won the electoral college vote, and so everybody's looking at this polling data saying, how did they get it so wrong? Like, so that has that affects the way people think about how pollsters do their job. Also, non-scientific polls affect reliability. So I mean, you don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to be like a professional pollster to put a poll out there and see what people think. Like, polls can be funded by political parties. They can be funded by certain partisan news outlets, and you know, they do this in order to demonstrate sort of they bias their results in order to demonstrate support for partisan policies, and you know, for the candidates that I gotta stop hitting this. For the candidates that they want to see
did you watch the whole thing?
elected, and so ultimately this is a lot of, you know, smoke and mirrors. It's not reliable, but it does affect the way people think. They see this, it's a very partisan, well-funded poll, and it seems very biased, and that has a way of, it can affect the way people think about actual real scientific polling. Okay, that leads us to big idea number 5. Big idea number 5. Political ideology is an interlocking set of ideas that forms the basis for political decision making. Okay. Yeah, let's get into ideology. So, as I mentioned before, political ideologies fall along the spectrum between conservative and liberal. And if you don't know, when something is referred to as right wing, that's conservative. Liberal or left wing, that's liberal. Okay, just think left wing starts with L, liberal. I don't know if you're struggling with that. There it is. Now, most Americans in general would consider themselves moderate. Okay, the majority of Americans, let's just say majority, not most, majority of Americans, they don't think of themselves as extremely conservative or extremely liberal on either side. Most Americans consider themselves moderate because we like to think of ourselves as thinking people who don't just fall in line with what everybody else is saying, right? But I will say, over time, in the last 25, 30 years, conservatives have gotten more conservative and liberals have gotten more liberal. You know, and I should back up and just let's talk about what these ideologies are. So liberalism is basically, liberals are open to allowing the government to expand in order to provide services for the public good. Okay, so liberals are much more open to that, right? They're much more open to government intervention for the sake of public flourishing. Conservatives, on the other hand, they emphasize tradition. They emphasize establishment, okay? And they are much more closed to government intervention in the lives of Americans. So liberals would say, conservatives would say, hey, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Whereas liberals would look at society and say, well, it is broke, so the government has to fix it, okay? Now, there are two major parties that basically align with these ideologies. There's the Democrats, and they align with liberal ideology, and you know, their platform, which is, you know, basically the statement of what the party believes and what the kind of policies that the party will work for if they get elected. Their platform includes a whole lot of things, like protecting a woman's right to abortion, equal rights for women, equal rights for LGBTQ+, health care for the poor, etc., etc. Republicans, on the other hand, align with conservative ideology, and so on their platform, they want low taxes. They want, an America first trade policy. They want anti-regulation of business, which on the flip side would mean they are pro-business. Okay, and we're going to keep talking about that. So let's go to the next big idea, the last one of Unit 4, and we'll get to some more of these super chats. Okay, big idea number 6. Public policy only reflects the attitudes and beliefs of those who actually participate in the political process. Okay, real quickly. So each ideology has a different view of how the government should be involved in the nation's economy. Liberals, they favor more government intervention in the economy. And the reason why is because they want to protect the public good from, unregulated businesses. Liberal economic ideology is, to some degree, a large degree, based on what's known as Keynesian economics, okay? And this addresses fiscal policy, which is, like government taxation and spending. And to make it entirely too simple, Keynesian economics is all about government spending. It creates demand by putting a big spender in there, and that big spender is Big Daddy government. You know what I'm talking about? Conservatives, on the other hand, they favor less government involvement in the economy, and because, and according to their own principles, they want to uphold the principles of the free market and get the government out. Whereas liberal economic policy is based on Keynesian economics, conservative economic policies are based on what's known as supply-side economics. So this also addresses fiscal policy, and it emphasizes that the forces of supply and demand, that these are important for the government to stay out of, because if the government gets involved in these forces, then ultimately you are restricting people's liberty. And they say ultimately that no matter what, the market is always going to correct itself when it comes to economic downturns or depressions or whatever. And so if you just wait long enough, it'll correct itself. The point is, liberals are much more open to having government involvement in the economic decisions. Conservatives, not so much. Okay. And let's just throw libertarian in there for funsies. I mean, not for funsies. It is in the curriculum. You should know it. Libertarians, basically, they favor almost no government involvement in the economy. All they really want is for the government to protect property rights and protects their ability to, trade voluntarily. All right. So I talked about fiscal policy a second ago. Let's talk about monetary policy. This addresses how much currency is in circulation in the national economy. So the Federal Reserve is responsible for managing monetary policy, and it does so by buying and selling government bonds, setting government requirements at banks, reserve requirements, which basically is how much money does the bank have to keep in their vaults. And they also manage the money supply through setting interest rates. And that can be, even though the Fed is an independent entity, it definitely feels political pressure from the various ideologies. And I think that's it. Yeah, that's it for Unit 4. So let's do some super chats. All right. How you feeling? Good. How you feeling? Good? Good Lord. I am
10 minutes? I have an hour.
Yes, AP Econ indeed. Trickle-down economics is basically supply-side economics, by the way. Yes, I will go over campaign finance, but that's in Unit 5. All right, let me do a few of these super chats, and then we'll move on to Unit 5.
The first one? No, I'm doing the second one first.
And reading your videos. Well, thank you, Mr. Doherty. Jody, to 8 a.m. A push actual. Hey, he think. Anyway, shout out Myth to get. I wish I could give you some FRQ predictions. I put in so this one thing for sure about the FRQ. Everybody listening? It will not. If you're asking about the, argumentative essay, for example, it's not going to be the prompt that they gave you last year. That's all I can say for sure. All I can say for sure. Okay. A couple more here. SCT Woven. Shout out to the GOAT, Miss Alonzo, for hosting the barbecue. Okay. Pixel 42. Shout out Miss Blackwell at WECIB. We're all getting 5s on this exam. Yes, you are. The Noings Music. This is to the DVHS Writing Guild and all our AP World, Euro, APUSH, and Gov students. We are getting 5s on all our exams. You got this. Good luck. Yes. I love it. You guys are getting it. I feel it. Y'all getting 5s. Ramen Boy GD. Shout out to
just
James
skip this part.
Patterson.
Okay, there we go.
Political participation. Big idea number 1. The Constitution protects voting rights, and the diversity of people eligible to vote has expanded over time. Okay, so over time,
I don't know
the
you
right to
can,
vote,
but
which the
there's
word for
someone
that,
calling you right now. Is there actually?
Yeah, Jose.
Whoa. Screw Jose. Thank you for telling me. It's okay. It's probably part of a
is
group chat.
franchise, so don't get confused if you see that. The right to vote over time has been expanded to more and more and more people. In the beginning of the Republic, the right to vote was basically restricted to white men who owned land. Okay? Then in 1830, let's do a real quick run through history here. Then in 1830, you get universal white male suffrage. Basically, that just removed the property requirements. So then, you know, all you had to be was white and a man, and you could vote. You didn't have to have any property. Then, through a series of constitutional amendments, the franchise was basically expanded to all Americans. So the 15th Amendment extended this franchise to black men. The 17th Amendment opened the voting of senators to the people. The 19th Amendment recognized the right of women to vote. The 23rd Amendment opened voting in D.C., Washington, D.C. The 24th Amendment abolished poll taxes. The 26th Amendment lowered the voting age to 18, and that was in response to the Vietnam War. And that was a lot of amendments I just threw at you. The point is, over time, it was in the beginning of the Republic, the amount of people who could vote was very, very small. Over time, it is expanded more and more and more so that more Americans can vote. Now, there's only a very small percentage, very small part of an American citizenry who cannot vote. Yeah, I guess that's all I have to say about that. Now, when people vote, there are 4 models that you need to know that explain how it is, you know, when somebody goes into the voting booth, what are they thinking? How are they understanding themselves as they're going into the voting booth, and how are they going to, what framework, what mental framework are they bringing to the task of voting? There's 4 of these models. Number 1, rational choice voting. Here, a person just votes based on their individual self-interest. And, you know, the rational piece is, this is someone who has, you know, carefully studied the issues and carefully studied the platforms, and they go in well informed and they vote based on their own research. The second model for voting is retrospective voting. This is when a person votes based on the track record of the politician in question. They basically look at this person and think and ask a very basic question. Was this candidate a turd, or was this candidate not a turd? If not, yeah, I'll go ahead and vote for him again. Okay? That's retrospective voting. Then the opposite is prospective voting. Here, a person votes based on the potential future the candidate can bring, based on campaign promises, etc., that align with that voter's ideology. And then fourthly, there's something called straight ticket voting. This is the easiest one. You basically just vote for all the candidates of your party. Okay, so like, if you're a Republican, you go into the voting booth, look, this side, everybody's Republican, tick, 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 it's over. Okay, that's all you have to do. Very easy, no thinking involved. And that leads us to big idea number 2. I didn't mean that to be like an insult, like no thinking involved. What I mean is, like, it's just simple. You know your loyalty and you just do it. I'm gonna move on. I love you guys. Okay. Big idea number 2. Several factors determine voter turnout in any given election. Okay, so when it comes to the ability of people to get out and vote, there are there's something called, we're trying to figure out how easy is it for people to vote. Well, sometimes there are things called structural barriers. For example, some states require government-issued photo ID in order to vote, and that is an example of a structural barrier. Whether it's a good idea or not what I'm saying, but it is, a hoop that you have to jump through, and that affects those kinds of policies affect how easy it is for people to vote. There's also the issue of political efficacy, which is a citizen's sense of whether or not their vote can actually make a difference, okay? So, for example, a conservative, a Republican who lives in New York, which, is a deeply blue state, deeply democratic state, might feel like, his or her vote doesn't count for anything. Like, yeah, I can go vote for the Republican candidate, but I live in New York, it's not gonna happen, okay? So that's the idea of political efficacy. How powerful do I feel like I actually am? How much of a difference do I think this vote can actually make? If I feel like my political efficacy is high, I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna vote. If I feel like it doesn't matter if I vote or not, low political efficacy, I might just stay home, okay? Also, the type of election affects how people vote. So presidential elections, they tend to have the highest voter turnout. Congressional elections, they're much lower. And then, as you go down to the local level, state level, county, local, municipal, those turnouts tend to be much lower percentage-wise than the presidential election. So the type of election also affects how people get out and vote. Also, demographics are a powerful tool in predicting how people are going to vote. So, for example, gender. And again, we're talking about generalizations here. These are, this is data. Women tend to vote for Democrats in higher numbers than Republicans. Men tend to be the opposite. Okay, so demographics, gender plays a role in how people vote. Age also plays a role in how people vote. So, the youngest eligible voters turn out in the smallest numbers. Okay, so people who just turned 18 and they get a chance to vote, they tend to be the smallest represented in any given election. But they also tend to lean Democrat. The oldest voters tend to be the most represented, and they tend to lean Republican. And so even if those two ends of the age spectrum are equal in terms of numbers of people, the fact that older voters vote more often than younger voters means that it's going to skew towards the older voters' ideology. Okay? All right, big idea number 3. Big idea number 3. All right, linkage institutions. I'm just going to go ahead and say I have the worst time saying the word linkage. I feel like it sounds like I'm drunk when I say it. Linkage institution. I'm gonna have to say it a lot here in the next couple of big ideas. So there it is. Okay, linkage is now I can't do it. Linkage institutions are just the other one for me is judicial. I sound drunk when I say that. Judicial. That's a hard one to say. I don't know why. Okay. Linkage institutions are social structures that connect people to their government or the political process and allow individuals to communicate their preferences to policymakers. Okay, so let's talk about the big 4 linkage institutions that you need to know. Number 1, political parties. Number 2, interest groups. Number 3, elections. Number 4, media. Okay? In the next big idea, we're going to talk about all 4. But now let me just talk about political parties for a second. So, what is a political party and what do they do? Well, by definition, a political party is an organization that sort of forms around ideological beliefs, and their main goal is to put forward candidates for election. Well, the main goal is to get those candidates elected, but they always put forward a candidate for an election. And what parties do very well is to mobilize voters and educate voters on the platforms of their particular parties, which is the next point, that parties actually create platforms and that outline the policies that they're going to the policies that they hope to pass if their candidate was elected. So As you should probably know by now, Republican platforms, the platform of the Republican Party is going to align mainly with conservative ideology. So like low taxes, national security, minimal government intervention. Democratic, the platform of the Democratic Party is going to align mainly with liberal ideology. So there's going to be emphases on minority rights and public welfare, government intervention in order to make sure that society is flourishing, etc. So that's what parties do. Parties also manage campaigns for their candidates. You know, their main goal is to get their candidate elected by hosting fundraisers, implementing targeted media strategies that's going to appeal to the most voters. And, you know, a candidate could do this on their own, but parties are well organized with help in order to do this. Now, there's also a phenomenon with political parties that's known as party realignment. Okay, this is when large groups of voters move from one party to another, and that can happen. It doesn't happen often, but that can happen if a party is, you know, badly defeated in an election, because it's like, okay, clearly the parties look at themselves very clearly. You know, we're not as effective in voters' eyes as we thought we would be. You know, for a big example of this was when
Why are you here?
Why are
Democrat
you recording?
Franklin Delano
Are you
Roosevelt
time lapsing?
was elected,
No. This is a
you know,
full.
beat
This is
the
going to be a
Republican
full
Herbert
2-hour
Hoover by
video
an absolute-
for Lee.
Oh, I see.
He requires it for extra credit for 50
I
points.
see.
Isn't it 75?
Oh, 75! You're so right.
Yeah.
Why are you here?
I'm waiting for Max. He's testing.
I went for Arilla. She's testing.
landslide.
Alex.
He's
An
He's
even bigger
also
landslide in
testing.
1936.
Is this
when he
coconut?
beat Alf Landon by an even greater margin. And so at that point, a lot of
Pretty
the
good.
more centrist members of some major coalitions
not.
of the
It is
Republican,
good.
traditional Republican Party began to move.
And I
over
love
to the
coffee.
Democratic
This
It's
Party,
not like
and the
coffee. It's
Republicans
like
have
a
reckoning
caramel
with
something.
who they
I don't
are
even know.
as they believe
It's pretty
how
good.
they want to
No.
get candidates elected from then on.
Ribbon Crunch.
All right, you guys were asking about
See, this is looking
Caramel
campaign
milk, how
finance.
about that?
That was pretty
It's
good.
now time. Okay, so
Latte.
campaign finance
It's a
laws
latte,
have
there
also
you go.
affected
Everything
No,
voting
I read it, but I mean,
or the way they do their job.
Non-dairy
So
creamery.
since the
That's what it was.
1970s,
I
campaign
didn't ask for
finance laws
non-dairy.
and Supreme Court decisions have very much changed how much.
oh wait, I haven't shown the crossover to the lead. We have Twinkie. Well, Twinkie and William are back. We have Camila Martinez. Elias has been with me the whole time.
That's the goal.
Elias is the GOAT. We love Elias here. Everyone say we love Elias on 3. 1, 2, 3.
We
love
love
Elias.
I'll see you later.
Peace out.
Yeah.
Money can be lawfully given to
What are
candidates
you doing?
and to parties.
Emotional
He's
support.
doing-
We're talking more about that in a moment. Ad nauseum.
Well, I wish you guys
Also,
luck
what has affected parties?
I'm ready for
is,
tomorrow.
Changes in communication.
Mr. Lee, watch this.
Data management
Straight
technology.
5.
Parties now rely on
College boards
psychographics
first
in order to
6.
understand
Actually,
the
Mr.
very
Lee.
That was me
deep
today in
understandings of
the
who
first
voters
six
are,
so
what
good.
they're
I'm gonna, like-
about, and they
I'm
use
gonna get
that
like a 2.
information to
Negative
refine
1.
their candidates' look.
You're gonna be
Like,
fine, bro.
You know, that,
I think
that guy
so.
should not be wearing
I
a
think
coat,
I'll be
he should just
good.
be wearing a
Hey,
t-shirt.
you
or
aced that
he should
first
have,
final.
a beard
You
or
got
not
this.
a beard. You know, like those kinds
ready.
of things. Those are just image things. But the psychographics are applied to all kinds of messaging for the candidates. It's pretty wild. And that leads us to a big idea number 4. Where's my mouse? There we go. Big idea number 4. The U.S. operates as a two-party system, and that makes it very difficult for third parties and independent parties to ever win an election. Okay, now there's 2 reasons. Go through this quickly. Why can't third parties ever win an election? I mean, it's very difficult. I mean, they theoretically could, but it's very difficult. Why? 2 reasons. Number 1, winner-take-all voting districts. Okay, in the Electoral College system, which is what was laid out by the Constitution, whichever candidate wins the most popular votes is awarded all of the electoral votes of that state. Okay, so it's a winner take all, and there's 2 exceptions to this. There's Nebraska and there's Maine. They split their electoral votes, but for every other state, it's a winner take all system. And so, you know, since the 2 major parties, you know, they're the biggest parties, they appeal to the largest amount of voters. And so that makes it almost impossible for a third-party candidate to receive any electoral votes, since they never even, you know, muster close to the majority of, you know, popular votes in any given state. The second reason it's hard for third parties to get elected is because of the incorporation of third party agendas into the platforms of the major parties. Now, you know, third parties often are much more narrow in what they, in their agenda and what they support. Like, often third parties are emphasizing certain policies like environmentalism, etc. And so, you know, if there's a significant contingent of Americans that support the agenda of that third party, then all one of the major parties needs to do, what the Republicans or the Democrats, all they got to do is, you know, make a strategic move and incorporate those items into their own platform, you know, thus nullifying the need for the third party. So, you know, third parties, they got it rough out there, and those are two big reasons why. And that leads us to big idea number 5. Interest groups are a linkage institution that mostly form around single issues or a certain demographic in order to influence policymaking. All right. So the goal of interest groups is to persuade policymakers to pass legislation, and specifically to pass legislation that aligns with that group's interests. And one of the chief ways that they do that is through the activity of lobbying. So, you know, because many of these interest groups form around a single issue, those lobbyists are often policy experts, right? They can help policymakers understand the impact of certain legislation. They can educate congressional representatives and help them pass it. That's the best possible interpretation of lobbying. But also remember what I mentioned last night, that interest groups are one point on the iron triangle, right? You've got agencies, congressional committees, and interest groups, and all of them work together in order to get policy passed and, you know, make sure each other are informed and that sort of thing. And these relationships can be very mutually beneficial. Again, that's the most positive interpretation of iron triangles, because they're good. They can be very good. Just like anything, they can also go bad, but they can be very good. So basically the way the iron triangle works is members of congressional committees, you know, they are helped by interest groups who provide policy information, like, because they're experts. Also, those interest groups will provide campaign donations if the representative seems to be sympathetic to the group's goals. And then around and around that relationship goes. Now, the level of influence that interest groups are able to exert depends on a few factors. Number one, funding. You know, in general, groups with better funding have much more power. Okay, just for example, the NRA, the National Rifle Association. They got lots of money. They got lots of power. Then there's the other thing that affects it is the free rider problem. So when a group of a larger group of Americans benefits from the efforts of the interest group, then it's like, you know, the interest group is doing all the funding, doing all the lobbying, doing everything that they do in order to get this particular policy passed, which is going to affect lots of people in America. That's what's known as free riders, right? The people who benefit from it are not necessarily part of the interest group themselves. They're not paying the bills, but their proposed legislation is going to help a lot more people than those in the group. That's going to lead us to big idea number 6. Big idea number 6. All right. The president is elected through a series of steps and ultimately through the Electoral College. Tasty. All right. Electoral College. All right, let's talk about presidential elections. So, you know, electing the president is about the most complex electoral process that we have in the United States. So first, let's talk about how it's done. Step 1, the candidate has got to win a state primary election, or caucus, depending on the state, in order to earn that party's nomination. And there are, I'm sad to say, a couple different types of primaries that you need to know. Number 1 is a closed primary. In a closed primary, voters have to vote for the candidate that aligns with the voters' declared party. So if you are a registered Republican, you have to vote for the Republican candidate in a closed primary, okay? In an open primary, voters can vote for any party's candidate that they want, okay? Now, I mentioned the word caucus. Some states do use caucuses instead of primaries. I'm not going to get into let's not complicate things right now on 2 nights before the exam. The chief difference between a primary and a caucus is that voting happens, in a caucus, voting happens at the state level by secret ballot. In a primary happens by secret ballot. Caucuses happen at a more local level, and the voting is a lot more visible. Okay.
Isn't a caucus like
The end.
where there's a bunch of there's a bunch of people and they just all vote on one thing?
Yeah.
It's like a
I remember that one image that Mr. Lee showed us. Hold on. I wanna. Caucus.
I remember it's like a board meeting.
Yeah. It's like clip art, because there was one specific one that I'm thinking of, and that always helps me, but I can't find it. It's somewhere in the notes.
Result is the same. It's just a
Yeah.
different process. Okay, so after the candidate wins the primary, then comes the general election. So, candidates travel around the country, they give speeches, they refine their positions, they're, participating in televised debates, et cetera, et cetera. And there's something that's known in the general election, there's something that's known as the incumbency advantage, which means, the incumbent is the president that's currently sitting, they're currently in office. The sitting president is much more likely to get reelected than the challenging candidate. And as we're going to see, that's much more true in congressional races. But the point is, the incumbent, it's like, everybody knows that person can be the president. They know the good, they know the bad, they know it all. So there's an advantage to that, all right? Then once the general election is finished, the vote goes to the Electoral College. So remember, the president is not elected by the people's votes, but instead by a small number of electors from each state. So each state has the same number of electors as they have members in Congress. Okay, so for example, Georgia has 16 electors, right? That's because there are 14 Georgia representatives in the House, and there are 2 senators. Okay, so that means Georgia has 16 electors when it comes to a presidential election. Now, electors almost always vote in line with the public vote, okay, but not always. Some states have laws, but the point is, there are some occasions where electors vote against what the popular vote was. They are known as faithless electors. Anyway, so once the Electoral College has, or as the Electoral College is doing their thing, remember, this is a winner-take-all system. So whichever candidate wins the plurality of the popular vote, they win all of that state's electoral votes. And again, Maine and Nebraska are the exceptions. They split their electoral votes. But everywhere else, that's how it goes. And then once that's over, we got ourselves a new president. All right, that leads us to big idea number 7. Congressional elections have less participation than presidential elections, and there are several factors which determine who gets elected to Congress. So let's talk about it. So congressional elections, let's start with the House. House seats, like all House seats, are up for election every 2 years. And then 1/3 of Senate seats are up every 2 years. So remember, I don't even know if I mentioned this yesterday, House representatives term in the House is 2 years. A senator's term is 6 years, and senators get reelected every 6 years, but they're staggered, so that a third of them get elected every 2 years on 1 year, then another third, and you get the point. Maybe I said that last night, I can't remember. Anyway, so congressional elections, midterm elections happen halfway through the presidential term. That's what's actually going to happen here in November. We're going to have midterm elections. And I mentioned the incumbent advantage before with the president. Again, is much greater in congressional elections. And that's because, the congressional elections are less people vote for these people, less voters vote for these candidates. And so the incumbent has a lot of advantages. Number one, name recognition. Okay? Some people, I mean, who knows how many Americans don't even know the names of their representatives, but if they're going to know any name, that is an advantage, that they have some name recognition because they've already been in office. These incumbents also have a network of financial donors, and money is a big deal in elections. We'll talk about that. But also, gerrymandered districts can be a problem for contenders seeking office as well. So, not to get too far into the weeds here, the majority party draws the congressional districts, and they will always draw them to their own advantage, right? And this is not illegal. This is how it goes. We talked last night about how when it gets illegal, it's because these districts are drawn based on race or some other qualification. But because the majority party draws these districts, they draw them to their own advantage, and it becomes very difficult for them to be unseated. Okay, that's why it's hard for that's what the incumbency advantage is very, very real. And that leads us to big idea number 8. Y'all still with me? Y'all still with me? We got after this 2 more big ideas, so 3 total. 3 total. All right. I'm seeing yes. I'm seeing yes. Good. Good. Let's keep going. Running a campaign for office is a complex and exceedingly complicated process, and campaign organizations and strategies affect the election process. All right, y'all are cooking now. All right, cooking. All right, giving me some energy. Okay. Campaigns. Okay, so one of the most important things for campaigns that often makes or breaks who wins is fundraising. Okay, it's rare for a candidate to finance their own campaign, but instead they rely on party funding and individual donors and organizations like political action committees or PACs or super PACs or so many different kinds of ways that money can be filtered. So over time, political campaigns have gotten much longer, and that means they've gotten much more expensive. Like, I mean, in a whole lot of countries, it's not unusual for campaign seasons to run 10 weeks or less. And that's because they have laws mandating it, but there are no such laws in the United States. And so, with states competing for earlier and earlier primaries, because the ones who go first often get a bump in tourism dollars, the election season has gotten longer and longer over time, and that means it is more and more expensive over time, and that leads us very nicely into big idea number 9. Money is at the heart of political campaigns. I wish I could tell you it was ideology. I wish I could tell you it was rational choice voting, but money is at the heart of political campaigns. But there are laws that govern such financial contributions, and that has led to the debate about the proper role of money in politics. So for this, let me just go ahead and introduce you to the Federal Election Commission, the FEC. This was an entity that was created by Congress in 1974. Now, the law which created the FEC also stipulated that individuals could not donate more than $1,000 to a candidate, and a political action committee could not donate more than $5,000 for a candidate, and this is both per election. Now, there was a ruling in a case called Buckley v. Vallejo. This is not a required case. In 1965, it challenges this law because the argument was you can't you can't restrict how much money we give to political candidates, because at the end of the day, if I'm giving money to a political candidate, that's essentially my speech, right? I am endorsing this candidate. And so Buckley v. Vallejo comes in against this law and says, you can't restrict. Money is essentially speech, so you can't restrict the amount of money that's being given. And the court upheld the law, and basically, they came into agreement that without limits upon campaign donations, fair elections were impossible, right? Because if money is speech, then those with the most money naturally have the most speech. They can speak the loudest, and those with the least money can speak the least. And to the justices, that did not seem like a fair system. And so they kept this restriction. But people with money found a way around that restriction. And here's where I introduce you to 2 different kinds of money. There's hard money and there's soft money. Hard money is money that's donated directly to a candidate's campaign. That money is subject to campaign finance laws. Those amounts that I just mentioned. But then there's soft money. This is money that's donated to a party or an interest group who not directly to the candidate, who could then buy advertising or whatever
I'm at 138 of 213.
Ah, you did the big one first.
on a candidate's behalf.
What time is it?
And if you do it sort of the
How is it
roundabout way like that,
2:30,
then
3:30?
that money was not
We're good,
subject
we're
to
good.
the regulations. That was not subject to the law. So the solution was came in 2002. It was the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, or BICRA. This law increased the limits of hard money donations, but it also sought to curtail the spending of soft money. And one regulation that they enacted through this law was the stand by your ad provision of the law. So in any political advertising, the candidate is required by law to say, I'm Steve Heimler and I approve this message, or whatever the name is, to show that all the finances are above board. Now, the big case, required case on campaign finance is Citizens United v. the Federal Election Commission. That came in 2010. This argued that the BICRA, the law that I just mentioned, that those limitations amounted to, again, a violation of free speech. So, like, if a corporation or other entity wants to spend money to endorse a candidate, they argued they should be able to do so in unlimited measure because of the principle of freedom of speech. Now, the court in this case ruled that restricting campaign donations was a violation of free speech. Therefore, the corporate funding of ads as a result of this decision, Citizens United, the corporate funding of ads and broadcasts cannot be limited by law. Okay, so ultimately, the thing that people often mention about this case is that it established the precedent that corporations are people, and they cannot have their free speech curtailed. And here it is, ladies and gentlemen, the last big idea of the night. Big idea number 10. The media is a linkage institution. Of course, it had to have linkage in it. The media is a linkage institution. It's also known as a watchdog agency, which holds the government responsible to its citizens. All right. So the media play a big role in political agenda setting, and that's through several different means, and that's changed over the course of history. When it comes to the traditional news media, in the beginning of the Republic, it was political messaging occurred through newspapers. Then over time, we got radio in the first half of the 20th century. And radio was used to broadcast political debates. Franklin Delano Roosevelt used the radio to great effect to talk to Americans about what was going on in his New Deal programs addressing the Great Depression. And we talked about that last night, so I'll move past that. Then, a couple decades later, television became one of the main communication tools for political messaging. And television was an interesting one, especially as it sort of came of age. It was technology that came of age during the Vietnam War, and so these television news reports are coming out of Vietnam that are profoundly contradicting what the president and his officials are saying about what's actually going on in the war. Like, people can see it with their eyes on the television. The president's saying, yeah, it's so great, everything's going real well over there, we're almost there, just a little more escalation of we got it. And so that led to a profound trust gap in the presidency and in the federal government. But the different ways in which the media do their job. Okay, one is investigative reporting. This has been around for a long time. The heyday of it was typically thought of during the Progressive era, the first maybe 20 years of the 20th century. A good example here is Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, which provided a very in-depth investigation on the profoundly unsanitary conditions in meatpacking plants, which I won't go into. But investigative journalism, one of the things that it does is it exposes certain scandals to the reading public, to the American public, and as a result of Upton Sinclair publishing The Jungle, several very important pieces of legislation were passed, like the Meat Inspection Act, I'm forgetting the other one off the top of my head. But the point is, the way the media covered these scandals led to reform. Okay, so the media, it's very important what they do. But with the rise of social media, that's become, the traditional news media is sort of very centralized. Social media, on the other hand, is a lot more decentralized. And social media is unhinged from the traditional outlets, although, traditional outlets do use social media to, establish their presence on sites like Facebook and X, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the media is also known as a gatekeeping entity. Okay, or the way, one of the features of the way they do their work is gatekeeping. The idea here is that, look, there's in a single day, like, so much happens around the world, even in our own country, even in our own neighborhood. There's only so much you can fit into, any, media outlet. And so, the issues that these newspapers or these news organizations choose to feature, that actually can shape the nature of the conversation, right? And this can especially affect elections because, the media tend to hyper focus on the, the races and the minutiae of the races, how each candidate is doing, and that has a way of influencing how people perceive these candidates. And then the last thing I'm going to say is that media has changed in the most recent past. And what I mean is, media ownership, who owns these media companies, that affects how the news is reported. So, for example, cable news networks, these are a relatively new phenomenon, 20, 25 years or so. Cable news networks who put news on 24 hours a day, they are for-profit companies, which means that they have incentives to report on what gets the most engagement, what gets the most eyeballs. And as partisanship in the news media has increased over time, cable news networks have altered their programming to fit with their audience. So, for example, CNN typically appeals more to liberals. Fox News typically appeals more to conservatives, and the more they lean into those particular ideologies, the less there's going to be any common ground between them. And additionally, when people gravitate towards these outlets, one or the other, they find themselves in an echo chamber of information. Like they're only being fed what confirms the already existing beliefs, and that can, it can be a problem. So, with that, that's everything. That's everything. Are you okay? Yeah, I'm okay. I'm good. I'm good. Love you guys. Okay, so I'm gonna finish up these super chats now. But if you're gonna leave, just so you know, this is the last stream for this particular subject, and I'm just glad we got to do it together this year. I love you guys, and you make me awfully happy for allowing me to be part of your education, part of what you're doing in the world, and I love it. I love it. So thank you, and good luck on that exam. I'm gonna be cheering you on. I'm gonna be over here just thinking about you, and no matter what happens at the end of it, I'm proud of you. Just so you know, I'm proud of you. You did a hard thing, and I love that about you. So, all right. So if you're gonna log off now, that's great. Glad you're around. But we got a whole stack of super chats over here. We need to get. Bash do for you guys.
Is the rest just super
Luke
chats?
Walt
I think
27.
it is.
Alicia Baker to lock in.
He answers a couple of questions.
Yeah,
but
there it is. There it left. There it is.
Do you think Lee wants us to watch the super chats?
Remember how I asked him if we needed to watch, if we could just skip through the parts super chats? He said we could. Because the super chats are just shout outs. I asked him if we could skip those. He said yeah.
my hero. Okay.
And the way Heimler sets these up is that he does, like in the first video, he says that he's gonna he does super chats at the end, like right after he gets through all the course material.
And more socks.
So I'm pretty sure you're done.
Yes, all right, HB Cheese 4, $5. Thank you. Nico Stojic. Shout out to Mr. Rollins class, SFHS, and my boy Steve.
I am.
E14. Shout out Mr. Smith from BHS. Tom Pearl is goated. All right, 7:45. David One Gill. Shout out Dr. Morgan, my hero. Kefotifa 3744. Love you, dude. Love you right back. Kifo, Sarsha, Claire, London, Mr. Feasley, Mr.
Go get
Nesson.
water while this
Hashtag
plays for a
London
little
isn't
bit
getting it
longer.
cheap. Lorena Sanchez. Thanks for making us all understand and keeping it fun. Oh, well, thank you. Appreciate that. Sophia McCutcheon. Shout out to Coach Witicha. Best ball teacher and coach. Us baldies got to stick together. Caitlin Kemjor. Thank you, Heimler, for helping me with my last minute studying in AP Guff. You're welcome. My mother recommended you because you're the reason my brother recommended you because you're the reason he got a 5 last year. Well, thank you. Tell your brother I said thanks. Yellow Chan 123. Shout out to Miss Bullis, our big domed tall queen. Harp 1. Thank you, Heimler, for your shiny head and for helping me get 5s on my history APs since sophomore year, going for the 3-peat with Gov. Hey, I have 5 on that. Let's get that 5 on the Gov exam. Meggie. This is from 749. Shout out to the GOAT John Laub from Co-op High, and thanks our GOAT Heimler for helping us throughout the year. Megan, Helen, and Kayla.
Okay, I am done.
Yours,
Mr. Lee actually said that we don't need to watch all this filler. To my mom, even. Elias was here for the entire journey, Mr. Lee. I'm done with the longer video, and I will show you my notes right now. Okay. So we started off with the Unit 3, 4, 5 review. Look at all these notes. We have Unit 3, big ideas, 1 of 10. And then all of this is Unit 1, or Unit 3, I mean. And then we get down here to Unit 4, where we finish this. And then I start going into insanity, as you can see. I start to doodle, I start to draw, and then I go into full insanity. This is me when you give me graphs. This is me when you give me FRQs. I don't want you to look at this. This is me when you give me graphs, Mr. Lee. This is when you give me an FRQ. And then we go to big, then we finish right here. So, first video done. I'm going to finish the other one. On your Google Classroom, it actually says it's worth 100 points, not 75. Let's see you uphold that deal, Mr. Lee. It says it right here. But anyways, I'm done. Peace out.